Berlin, 1942. The world is at war. And deep inside a laboratory on the Dahlem campus, a group of Germany's most brilliant physicists are about to make a decision, one that could have changed history forever. But they won't, because they believe the atomic bomb is impossible. The irony is almost unbearable. While Allied scientists race to unlock the terrifying secrets of nuclear fission, Germany, the birthplace of quantum physics itself, dismisses it as fantasy. This isn't a story about ignorance. It's a story about arrogance, about faith in outdated theories, about a group of men who thought they were too clever to believe in miracles or nightmares. The scene opens not on a battlefield, but in a lecture hall. Professor Werner Heisenberg, Nobel Prize winner, one of the greatest minds of his time, stands before a blackboard covered in complex diagrams. To the outside world, he is Germany's Oppenheimer, the man who might deliver Hitler, the ultimate weapon. But, in truth, he's already made up his mind. The energy from splitting an atom, he tells his colleagues, is far too small to make a bomb. Laughter fills the room. Not mocking laughter, confident, academic laughter. The laughter of men, who are certain they understand the limits of nature. They calculate, they measure, they conclude. Building a nuclear weapon would require a reactor the size of a factory and resources the Reich could never spare. So they abandon the pursuit. And history, it takes a breath. Meanwhile, thousands of kilometers away, in a secret complex in New Mexico, a very different kind of laughter echoes through the night. American and British scientists exile Germans, among them work under the codename Manhattan Project. They're sleepless, anxious, and half believe they're chasing a ghost, but they keep chasing. For them, the question isn't whether it's possible. It's whether they can do it first. Back in Germany, the war machine consumes everything steel, oil, manpower, but not imagination. Imagination has been strangled by bureaucracy, by ideology, by fear. The Nazi regime doesn't trust its scientists, and the scientists, in turn, don't trust their leaders. They work in fragments, isolated, cautious. The idea of a unified nuclear program dissolves into petty rivalries and conflicting agendas. The result? The country that gave the world Einstein, Planck, and Heisenberg never comes close to the bomb. It's a paradox that haunts history. How could the most scientifically advanced nation on Earth, the birthplace of modern physics, dismiss the power that would soon end the war? The answer lies not in equations, but in psychology. The German physicists were blinded not by ignorance, but by certainty. They saw the atom as something elegant, stable, governed by rules too intricate to weaponize. They saw physics as art, not destruction. And yet, on the other side of the Atlantic, that art was being redefined. Where Germany saw impossibility, America saw inevitability. The camera pans across the globe, from Heisenberg's blackboard to Oppenheimer's desert test site. Both men, once students of the same European tradition, now walk opposite paths. Heisenberg lectures on theoretical purity. Oppenheimer stares at a growing fireball in his mind. July 1945. The world changes forever. A bomb built on equations once dismissed as fantasy tears a hole in the sky over New Mexico. And less than a month later, that same power reduces two cities, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, to ash. When the news reaches Germany, Its surviving scientists are living in British custody, in a place called Farm Hall. They are being secretly recorded. The transcripts declassified decades later capture a moment of pure disbelief. Heisenberg's voice trembles. "They can't have done it," he says. "It would require tons of uranium. It's not possible." But it was. And, in that instant, the laughter of 1942 turns to silence. The world would later debate whether Heisenberg and his peers deliberately slowed their work, whether moral hesitation saved humanity from a German atomic bomb. But the truth, buried beneath pride and propaganda, is simpler. They didn't stop the bomb. They stopped believing, but it could exist. This is the story of a failure, not of intelligence, but of imagination. A story where skepticism became blindness and certainty became defeat. Because in science, as in war, the most dangerous phrase ever spoken is, "That's impossible." Fade in. From the white flash of Hiroshima, the blinding light fades into grayscale. The camera drifts across a deserted laboratory, papers scattered, equations half erased, beakers coated in dust. To understand how Germany, the most scientifically advanced nation of the 20th century, dismissed the atomic bomb, we have to go back to the moment when brilliance met fear. It began with a discovery that should have changed everything. December 1938. Two German chemists, Otto Hahn and Fritz Strassmann, stumble upon something extraordinary. While bombarding uranium with neutrons, they find that the atom doesn't just break apart, it releases a staggering amount of energy. It was nuclear fission, the key to the most powerful weapon in human history. And they discovered it in Berlin. Within weeks, the news spread through the physics community. In another era, it would have been celebrated as a triumph of German science, a testament to the nation that had produced Einstein, Planck, and Heisenberg. But this was 1939. Hitler had already begun his march across Europe, and Germany's relationship with science was no longer one of curiosity, it was one of control. Many of Germany's greatest minds were gone, exiled, silenced, or dead. Jewish scientists had been purged from universities. Einstein had fled to America. Lise Meitner-Hahn's longtime collaborator, the one who truly interpreted the fission process, escaped through the snow into Sweden. From that moment on, German science would never be the same. The brain drain had begun, and the Nazis didn't even realize it. The discovery of fission was like holding a lit match in a room full of dynamite. The only question was, who would light it first? In Britain and America, alarm bells rang immediately. Physicists understood what it meant. If uranium could be split, the energy could be harnessed into a weapon beyond imagination. Einstein, horrified by the thought of a German atomic bomb, signed a letter to President Roosevelt, a letter that would ignite the Manhattan Project. In Germany, however, the reaction was quieter, more academic, more skeptical. When the German Army Weapons Office learned of fission, they assembled a team of physicists, the Uran-Verein, or Uranium Club. Their mission: determine whether the reaction could power an explosive device. At first, it seemed promising. They had Heisenberg. They had Hahn. They had some of the finest theoretical minds in the world. But within months, optimism began to fade. The calculations didn't add up. The resources didn't exist. And the war now consuming Europe demanded tanks, planes, and bullets, not dreams of invisible fire. Germany's scientists were divided. Some pursued the science for its own sake. Others simply wanted to survive. Heisenberg himself, respected, brilliant, cautious, overestimated the amount of uranium needed for a bomb by several orders of magnitude. His conclusion was simple. The bomb was theoretically possible, but practically impossible. But beneath the equations lay something deeper. Fear. Fear of failure. Fear of Hitler's wrath. Fear of being tied to a weapon that could end for the world. The Nazi regime made one thing clear. Science served the state, not the truth. Every experiment, every idea had to justify its worth to the war machine. The physicists, once free thinkers, became cautious bureaucrats in lab coats. Innovation replaced by obedience. Discovery replaced by fear. Meanwhile, in the Allied world, the exact opposite was happening. Refugee scientists, many of them German or Austrian, were now leading the charge to build the bomb before Hitler could. While the German Uranium Club debated reactor designs, Los Alamos tested implosion triggers. The difference wasn't intelligence. It was belief. One side believed the impossible might just be possible, and they were willing to try. The other side decided it wasn't worth the effort. Early 1942, Germany's nuclear research freezes. Heisenberg proposes building a reactor, not a bomb. He imagines nuclear power might one day drive submarines, but not destroy cities. Certainly, not end a war. The army loses interest. Funding dries up. The scientists return to teaching, to theory, to waiting out the storm. By the time the Allies land in Normandy, 1944, Germany's atomic effort is a shadow of its former self, a handful of physicists, tinkering in makeshift labs, unaware that across the ocean the Manhattan Project is nearing completion. And yet, they weren't fools. They were brilliant. They were careful. But they were also human. They watched their cities burn, their armies crumble, their nation starve. And in that chaos, the idea of a weapon that could end the war in a single blast must have seemed like fantasy. Perhaps, to them, it was easier not to believe. The irony of history is that Germany had every advantage except imagination. The country that first discovered fission never realized what it truly meant. The scientists who could have changed the course of the war never understood that the real danger wasn't the atom itself, but their refusal to take it seriously. Cut to a darkened room, 1945. The war is over. Heisenberg and his colleagues sit in a British manor, unaware they're being recorded. Then, the news arrives. An atomic bomb has destroyed Hiroshima. Their reaction is disbelief. Then, silence. Heisenberg grabs a piece of chalk and begins to calculate feverishly, desperately. Within minutes, he realizes the truth. They could have done it. They had been wrong. Fatally wrong. The setup for one of history's greatest ironies was complete. The men who might have built the bomb first refused to believe in it. And when they finally did, it was too late. Germany, 1940. 2. The outside world. It looks unstoppable. But beneath the roar of tanks and the thunder of speeches, another war is being lost, a war of the mind. Inside, the universities and research centres, once hailed as the beating heart of modern physics, silence reigns. Posters of Einstein, once a national hero, have been torn down. Books on relativity banned. The new Germany has no room for Jewish science. The very ideas that gave birth to quantum mechanics are now viewed with suspicion, even fear. Ideology had infected curiosity. Science no longer served truth, it served power. In the eyes of the Nazi regime, knowledge was only valuable if it could conquer. And yet, the greatest conquest of all was slipping through their fingers, atom by atom. We move through the corridors of the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute, the epicenter of German nuclear research. The walls are cracked, equipment scarce, morale lower still. Heisenberg, Hahn, and a handful of others continue their work not on a weapon, but on understanding the strange new energy they've uncovered. To them, it's pure science. To the regime, it's useless. Funding is cut. Priorities shift to the Luftwaffe, to V-2 rockets, to propaganda. The uranium project becomes a curiosity, a side experiment for a future that may never come. Meanwhile, the Reich tightens its grip on every intellectual pursuit. Physicists are watched, their letters intercepted, their conversations reported. The very act of questioning official dogma becomes dangerous. For a scientist like Heisenberg, whose mentor, Niels Bohr, now lives under occupation in Denmark, every word carries weight. In 1941, he travels to Copenhagen to meet Bohr. The purpose of that meeting remains one of history's enduring mysteries. Some say he tried to warn Bohr about the Nazi atomic project. Others believe he sought Bohr's advice, or perhaps his forgiveness. What we know is that it ended badly. Bohr left shaken. Heisenberg returned to Germany, alone. Whether he was a secret saboteur or simply cautious, no one knows. But one thing is certain. After Copenhagen, the German nuclear dream quietly died. The irony is cruel. While Germany's physicists stalled, their former students now exiled in Britain and America carried on their work with urgency. Many had fled persecution, only to build the most terrible weapon imaginable. In Los Alamos, a German accent was common in the labs. In Germany, it was a liability. Cut to a montage. Allied scientists scribbling equations, testing reactors, assembling prototypes. Across the ocean, science had been liberated from fear. Its only master, it was necessity. The Allies were desperate. Rumors spread whispers that Germany was building a uranium bomb. That fear drove them to achieve the impossible. But in Berlin, the myth was reversed. Heisenberg and his colleagues believed the Allies lacked the materials and the knowledge. They assumed that if they couldn't do it, no one could. It was a fatal assumption, a quiet arrogance, disguised as reason. By 1943, Germany's scientists were no longer innovators. They were survivors. Bombs rained down on their cities. Supplies dwindled. Laboratories went dark. Many researchers were drafted or fled into the countryside to escape Allied raids. The great institutions of German science, once unmatched, were reduced to candle-lit rooms, scattered instruments, whispered theories. Heisenberg himself worked from a farmhouse in southern Germany, building a small experimental reactor. It never reached critical mass. It never could. The design lacked both the uranium and the moderation needed to sustain a chain reaction. Heisenberg believed he was on the right path, but his calculations were flawed, and there was no one left to challenge him. Elsewhere, in the Reich, the SS tried to seize control of the remaining scientific projects. They demanded progress, results, weapons, but the scientists had nothing to give. Instead, they offered excuses. The lack of heavy water, the shortage of uranium, the chaos of war. all of it true, all of it meaningless, to a regime that measured worth only in destruction. As the Third Reich crumbled, so too did its grip on science. By 1945, the so-called Uranium Club was less a research team than a rumor, a handful of weary men clinging to theories no one believed in anymore. They spoke of energy, of purity, of the beauty of physics, while the world around them burned. And in that burning, they missed the future. Cut to July 16th, 1945, the Trinity Test Site, New Mexico. American scientists gather nervously around their instruments. The countdown begins. 10, 9, 8. The explosion lights up the desert like a second sun. Oppenheimer whispers softly, almost to himself, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." It was called Farm Hall. An elegant British manor turned into a prison for minds, 10 of Germany's most brilliant scientists, confined not by bars, but by secrecy. Among them, Werner Heisenberg, Otto Hahn, Max von Laue, Carl Friedrich von Weizsäcker, men who once shaped the destiny of modern physics, now stranded in defeat. They believed they were being held as honored guests. In truth, every word they spoke was being recorded. Camera pans through chandeliers and corridors. Hidden microphones nest in the walls, disguised behind wallpaper and lampshades. The Allies didn't just want to guard these men, they wanted to listen. They wanted to know, how close had Germany come? Had they tried to build the bomb? For weeks, the scientists discussed trivialities, war stories, theories, rumors of the Reich's collapse. They talk about their work, their mistakes, their pride. They seem relaxed, even smug. They joke about the Americans chasing impossible dreams. To them, the idea of a working atomic bomb is absurd to the ultimate scientific mirage. Then, on August 6, 1945, the world shifts. A British officer enters with a newspaper. The headline reads, "Atom bomb dropped on Japan." The words cut through the chatter like a blade. At first, there's disbelief. Then, laughter, nervous, dismissive laughter. Heisenberg shakes his head. They can't have done it. It would take tons of uranium. Hahn, pale and trembling, stares at the floor. He is the man who discovered fission and now realizes what his discovery has unleashed. He mutters softly, "I am personally responsible for the deaths of hundreds of thousands of people." Von Laue tries to comfort him. "No, Otto, you are not. If anyone had built it, they would have used it. The Americans, they just did." The recordings capture more than disbelief. They capture the sound of certainty shattering. For years, these men had been sure the bomb was impossible. Now, faced with the evidence, their world collapses in on itself, just like the atom they once dismissed. Heisenberg retreats to a blackboard in the corner. His mind races. He begins to scribble equations, the same ones he'd once used to dismiss the bomb as unfeasible. This time, he gets it right. Within an hour, he rederives the critical mass of uranium needed for a chain reaction. He looks up, silent. He knows. They could have done it. He could have done it. And he didn't. The irony is almost unbearable. The man who might have built the first atomic bomb for Germany, the Nobel-winning genius who once reshaped physics itself, is now realizing that he miscalculated not because he lacked intelligence, but because he lacked imagination. The tragedy of Farm Hall is not that Germany failed to build the bomb. It's that its scientists refused to believe anyone else could. Their failure wasn't technical, it was psychological. The Allies had fear, and fear gave them urgency. The Germans had arrogance, and arrogance gave them blindness. That night, The mood in the house shifts. Hahn locks himself in his room, weeping. Wiesecker paces the halls, muttering that perhaps it's better this way, that if Germany had built such a weapon, it would have been used without hesitation. Heisenberg, sleepless, sits by the window. Outside, the English countryside is still. The only sound is the wind and the ticking of the clock, like a countdown that's already ended. He speaks quietly. We never worked on a bomb, only on a reactor, but perhaps that was cowardice. No one replies. Cut to an image of Hiroshima, a city reduced to ash, shadows burned into walls. The sound fades, replaced by silence. Heisenberg's voice returns, slow, broken. I didn't think it could be done so fast. I didn't think anyone could do it at all. And that was the moment Germany's war truly ended, not on the battlefield, but in the mind of its scientists. When the impossible became real, and they realized they had underestimated both physics and humanity. For decades, historians would argue, did Heisenberg secretly sabotage Hitler's nuclear ambitions? Did he intentionally slow the research, knowing the moral cost? But the farm hall transcripts tell a different story, not of resistance, but of misjudgment. A generation of geniuses who mistook doubt for wisdom. The camera lingers on the chalkboard. Equations scrawled hastily, fading in the candlelight. Numbers that could have changed history, ignored, dismissed, too heavy to believe. In the end, it wasn't Allied spies or bombings or shortages that stopped the German bomb. It was disbelief. They had the science. They had the minds, but they didn't have faith in the impossible. As dawn breaks over Farm Hall, the men gather for breakfast. No one speaks of the bomb anymore. Outside, the war is over. Inside, it lingers quiet, invisible, and permanent. That morning, Heisenberg turned to his colleagues and said one final thing. Perhaps we should have asked fewer questions about why not, and more about what if. A pause. Then silence. And with it, the echo of the moment Germany lost its race not against time but against belief. It was over. The war. The race. The illusions. The men who once believed themselves the masters of modern physics now sat as witnesses to a truth they had refused to see. The atom, once a symbol of purity and order, had become a weapon of chaos, and the hands that could have shaped that destiny had hesitated. In the hours that followed, the house was silent. Heisenberg retreated to the piano, playing fragments of Bach between long, hollow pauses. Hahn refused to leave his room. Von Weizsäcker murmured half to himself, "Thank God, it wasn't us." But the relief didn't last. It curdled into something heavier, the weight of knowing that history had moved on without them. When Germany surrendered, its scientists believed they had survived the war with their integrity intact. But after Hiroshima, they began to understand that survival was not the same as innocence. They hadn't built the bomb not because they couldn't, but because they didn't believe anyone could. And now, their disbelief had become the final irony of the war. Cut to archival footage of Hiroshima. Shadows burned into walls. Trees turned to ash. Silence, broken only by a soft wind. In Japan, the impossible had become reality. In Germany, reality had become unbearable. Historians would later pore over the farm hall recordings. Some argued Heisenberg had secretly sabotaged the project, that he'd misled the Nazi leadership on purpose. Others claimed he was simply wrong. But the transcripts tell a different story, not of conspiracy, but of confusion. In their own words, the scientists revealed disbelief, not defiance. They weren't heroes in hiding. They were dreamers. out of time. The question of guilt haunted them for the rest of their lives. Otto Hahn went on to win the Nobel Prize for his discovery of fission. He accepted it quietly, the look in his eyes heavier than gold. Heisenberg continued his research, lecturing on quantum theory and philosophy. But his students noticed it, the melancholy in his tone, the weariness behind his precision. When asked about the war, he rarely spoke of politics. He spoke of misunderstanding. "It's easy to see, after the fact," he once said, "that the greatest mistake we made was to underestimate what others might believe possible. There's a tragedy in that, not of failure, but of faith. Because science, at its core, depends on belief, the belief that the unknown can be known, that the impossible can be reached. That imagination matters more than certainty." The German physicists had all the knowledge they needed to change the world, but they lacked the courage to believe the world could change. Montage: Heisenberg lecturing, Hahn receiving his medal, a mushroom cloud rising over black and white film. Meanwhile, the bomb they dismissed changed everything. It ended a war and began another, the Cold War, the arms race, the age of mutually assured destruction. The same curiosity that split the atom now threatened to split humanity itself. And yet, out of that destruction came reflection, a reckoning that would redefine the relationship between science and morality. At a symposium years later, one of the surviving German scientists was asked if he regretted not building the bomb first. He paused, then said quietly, "No. If we had built it, the world might have ended sooner. Perhaps ignorance saved us, though it was never noble." That paradox between wisdom and cowardice, between morality and failure, is what makes this story unforgettable. Because the German scientists were not villains. They were not saints. They were men, caught in a storm, blinded by the brilliance of their own minds. And when the light finally came, it was too bright to look at. Cut to archival footage: Heisenberg walking along a lakeside path in Bavaria. Grey-haired, distant. His reflection shimmers on the water, fractured, fading. Heisenberg once said that in every great discovery there is a moment when the scientist must choose between what is known and what is possible. He chose caution. Oppenheimer chose the abyss. Both paid the price. When the atomic bomb fell on Hiroshima, it didn't just destroy a city. It ended an era of innocence. It forced humanity to face a truth as simple as it was terrifying. We had learned to split the atom, but not our pride. In the end, perhaps the greatest irony is that Germany's failure saved it. The scientists who dismissed the bomb were spared the burden of its creation, but not the shame of their disbelief. And the Allies who built it won the war, but inherited the guilt. The camera pans upward from the still water to the empty sky. The voice softens, steady, reflective. Science has no morality. It only has direction given by the hands that guide it and the hearts that doubt it. In 1945, those hands changed the world forever. And in doing so, they revealed a truth that every generation must face. It is not knowledge that destroys us. It is the certainty that we already know enough. The title appears one final time. German scientists dismissed the atomic threat until Hiroshima changed everything. Then, the faint echo of a Geiger counter, clicking softly into silence.